All right. Hey, everyone. This is Hunter and Melanie.
Hello.
Coming at you from Zoom. Hopefully, this works all right. Um, we did the foundations review over Zoom last night. It seemed to work out all right. So, hopefully, it works out good for eternal families. Before we get started, just a couple reminders that I have written down. The enrichment papers are due tomorrow, and that's Wednesday. I don't know when you guys are going to watch this, but Wednesday, April 15th at 11:59. Remember, there's two that you have to do. There's a 15-point option or a 30-point option. If you choose to do a 30-point option, just turn it into the first submission and leave the second one blank. If you do the 15-point option, make sure you turn both of those in one and two. And then just read the instructions really carefully on that. A lot of those ones will ask you to share a picture or a screenshot of whatever you did. And if you don't share a screenshot or a picture, then Melanie and I have to take off points, and we don't like doing that. Breaks our little hearts. So just make sure you follow the instruction carefully, and if you do that, you should get full points. The next one is the doctrines paper that you guys turned in. Really great job on those. Melanie and Brother Griffiths have been grading those like crazy. I've been working on the papers for the Foundations of the Restoration class, but I read a couple of the Eternal Families ones in there. Really great, so nice job on those. Look at your grades, make sure that everything looks right. If you have a 0 in for those papers, then there's probably an issue turning it in, so contact either me or Melanie as soon as you can. Next thing I wanted to remind you guys about is the student evaluations, where you get to rate this course and how everything went. So you can fill those out. The university has already sent out like 4 or 5 emails asking you to do those. This is different. I think the School of Religion, the Department of Religion sends out a survey as well. We're not looking for the Department of Religion survey. We're looking for the university one. If you're having issues finding that, you can just Google BYU student evaluations, and the first link that pops up is the link to that. You'll just log into your account and take it. After you take it, the university will send an email to me and Melanie, and we'll get those points in sometime next week. And that's an extra credit opportunity, I believe. Is that right, Melanie?
Yeah.
Okay. And then lastly, we just ask you guys to look over your learning suite, make sure that everything looks right, make sure that we haven't, messed up, gave you a 0 on something that you're not supposed to have a 0 for. Just any last minute changes that need to be made, please contact me or Melanie. If you've contacted us in the past and we didn't answer you, we might have just overlooked your email. We're really sorry. We try to answer all those, but send us another email and we'll make sure you're taken care of. That being said, let's start with the final review for Religion C200. Why can't I go to the next slide? Okay, here we go. All right, the final exam. This is going to be open from April 17th to the 22nd. That's the finals week. It is not administered in the testing center. It's administered on Learning Suite, like most of your other finals. And we'll talk more about how that's going to work. There's 50 questions. So the first 50 questions will look exactly like exams 1 and 2. We're going to cover everything from physical intimacy to promoting and defending the family. Of those 50 questions, 31 of them are those according to elder/sister questions. And then after that, there'll be 25 more comprehensive questions for a total of 75 questions. And those comprehensive questions will come from exams 1 and 2. They're pretty much copy-paste of exams 1 and 2. This exam is going to be 90 points total, 18% of your grade. So make sure you study for it, but don't freak out. This class isn't meant to stress you out. Just remember that you guys are awesome. This exam has nothing to do with your testimony or how spiritual you are. If that were the case, I would get a 0 in the class. So don't base your testimony off of this grade, okay? You guys are going to do great. So how this works, the Learning Suite final. It is video proctored, but we're not using Proctorio. So Learning Suite has a feature where you can force students to have to turn on their webcams while they're taking the test. And so that's going to be the same for you guys. This is video proctored, so make sure that you're wearing clothes, make sure that you look appropriate, and you have your webcam enabled. It won't let you take the test if the webcam isn't on. So if you're having webcam issues, you're going to need to borrow a friend's computer. I believe you can take it on iPads or tablets or phones that have webcams, things like that. But do what you can. If you have questions about it, try to get it over early so that if you do have questions about it, you can contact Melanie or Brother Griffiths or me, and so we can get that taken care of. This one will have a 2-hour limit, but Melanie and I just went through the entire test in 20 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think you're going to get anywhere near 2 hours because it's only 75 questions. And then last thing is, remember this is a religion class. You know, it might be easier to cheat. I don't know. If you guys are cheating on a religion exam, then you're living a pretty sucky life, I'm sorry to say. So don't cheat, or you'll, as this girl in Vegas, as the back of her sweatshirt says, go to hell. And the text on her sweatshirt matches the same font that we use for our slides, so I really like this. I chased her all around Vegas trying to get that picture, and I'm wearing the same sweatshirt, so that's cool. Okay. Anyway, all right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Melanie's gonna talk about physical intimacy, Melanie's gonna talk about intimacy in marriage.
Alrighty. Let's do this thing. Okay, so we're gonna start off from this quote with Spencer W. Kimball, and he kind of goes over like why we have physical intimacy, and so we basically just wanted to highlight here that for the propagation of the human race and for the expression of that kind of love between man and wife that makes for true oneness, his commandments to the first man and women to be one flesh was as important as his command to be fruitful and multiply. So in our society today, there's kind of odd like depictions of what intimacy in marriage kind of looks like. And so he goes on and he kind of just identifies these deceptive notions. And so what we need to understand is that it's extremely deceptive that in society that marriage is sexually repressive and that affairs outside of it are fulfilling. And it's totally a lie that persists on in like television, music, books, movies, all of that. So we want to make sure you guys don't believe that because it's not true. And yeah. In this slide, where Sister Nelson kind of goes on with that the more united a couple is, like emotionally and through communication and how trusting they are of each other, is the more unified they are in all of those areas, the more intimate the relation is overall. And then David A. Bednar goes and he says, sexual relations are in mortality one of the ultimate expressions of our divine nature and potential and a way of strengthening emotional and spiritual bonds between husband and wife. So what we really want you guys to get from the slide is that it's the ultimate expression of our divine nature and potential. And then we weren't sure when we talked about this, but we know, we're just letting you guys know it's on the test. But our 4 levels of pornography involvement consist of inadvertent exposure, occasional use, intensive use, and compulsive use. So we just want to make sure you guys can identify that list and be able to list those off.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to move into the sanctity of life and what that all entails. And so what does it entail? Here's some questions to consider. This is actually just from a slide about the sanctity of life. When we talk about sanctity of life, we're referring to things like abortion, euthanasia, suicide, birth control, duration of gestation, which we'll talk about, termination, and meaningful life. When does that begin in the womb? And so for each of these things, make sure you know the church's stance. So know the church's stance on abortion, the church's stance on birth control, church's stance on euthanasia, termination, suicide, duration of gestation, and meaningful life, those 2. There's not really a church stance on it, but I'll tell you exactly what they are. There's a quote from President Nelson. So this is what we're talking about in sanctity of life. Let me make sure we have, I guess for all of these things, one of the most, I think the underlying thing for a lot of these things, maybe except for, abortion, it comes into play a little bit, but maybe not for suicide. is that for all of these things, there's sacred decisions that need to be made. So when you have questions about, for example, your great great grandpa who is on his deathbed and you're deciding whether you need to pull the plug or not, that's what termination is. The church stance on this is that these are private decisions to be made between a husband and wife and the Lord, and maybe other family members too if it involves your great great grandpa or something like that. But that's the underlying thing, is sacred decisions. Know what those are, that these are between husband and wife and the Lord, and sometimes other family members. So let's look at the church policy on abortion. The Lord did command that thou shalt not kill nor do anything like unto it. And that's one of the 10 commandments. And so the church says that abortion isn't murder, but it is like unto it. So this is pretty serious. And so you guys are going to need to know that their only possible exceptions are when a pregnancy is resulted from a forcible rape or incest, or a competent physician determines that the life and health of the mother is in serious jeopardy, or that a competent physician determines that the fetus has severe defects that will not allow the baby to survive beyond birth. Important things to remember: a competent physician. The church, doesn't just use random words. They decided to use competent physician. Determines that the life or health of the mother is in serious jeopardy. I think there's some physicians out there that are saying, a mother who is incapable of raising a baby, this could cause her some stress by raising the baby. That's not serious jeopardy. Everybody experiences stress. So the church policy on abortion is pretty much a no, except for in these 3 cases. And in these 3 cases, we still expect the sacred decision to be made where a husband and wife talk to each other. For example, after maybe a forcible rape or something like that, a husband and wife should talk to each other, decide, are we going to have this baby or not? So those sacred decisions still come into play. All right, let's move on to when does meaningful life begin? This is what I was talking about, the meaningful life and duration of gestation. This is a great quote from President Nelson. I just want to skip down to, he talks about, how incredible it is when a new life is formed and when that heart starts beating, and how different things come together and how those chromosomes come together to form a baby. But near the bottom, it says, a continuum of growth results in a new human being. A continuum. I think that's really cool. Approximately 22 days after the 2 cells have united, a little heart begins to beat. At 26 days, the circulation of blood begins. To legislate, this is the important part. He says, to legislate when a developing life is considered meaningful is presumptive and quite arbitrary, in my opinion. And so, he's kind of calling out anyone who's trying to legislate or make laws based on, when does that life begin? For us to determine that as human beings is kind of like we're playing God, and we don't want to do that. And so I really like how he explains it. I really like how, he's found meaning in that life. Abortion is a serious thing. I honestly, personally, I can't stand it, but this is why we have the church to help guide us in making those decisions and help us understand the big picture, that it isn't just about, choice. It's about life, which is, a lot bigger than choice. All right, so let's get into circumstances surrounding suicide. This is one where maybe the sacred decision doesn't come into play. For suicide, it's always going to be a no. There's not really exceptions to this one. But what we do know is that this is from M. Russell Ballard. He says that the Lord also recognizes differences in intent and circumstances. And he says, was the person who took his life mentally ill? Was he or she so deeply depressed as to be unbalanced or otherwise emotionally disturbed? Was the suicide a tragic, pitiful call for help that went unheeded for too long? And so he asks these really important questions, and how are we supposed to answer these once a person has already passed on? These are questions that only Heavenly Father can answer. And so, suicide obviously isn't God's will, but at the same time, we have to kind of trust in Him. And I think this next slide is good. We have to withhold judgment because we don't know the circumstances. And that's exactly what President Ballard is saying here. When God does judge us, I feel He will take all things into consideration: our genetic makeup, our mental state, our intellectual capacity. So he takes those things into account, where for us as humans, it's hard for us to take into account. We're really good at comparing ourselves. But I really like the parable of the talents. If you think about some of the numbers behind the parable of the talents, there's a man who's given 5, one who's given 2 talents, and one who's given 1 talent. In the end, imagine if the 2 talent guy and the 5 talent guy are talking to each other. The guy with 5 talents sees that the 2 talent guy now has 4 talents. He doesn't know, perhaps, where that 2 talent guy began. He doesn't know that maybe he started out with only 2 talents. And the guy with 5 talents could be thinking, oh man, this guy, he is not doing so well. He lost a talent. He started with 5 like I did, and now he lost one. When in reality, the guy with 2 talents started with 2 talents and doubled what he had, just like the guy with 5 talents. And on the flip side, the guy with 4 talents is thinking, wow, I did a great job. I doubled my talents. And then he sees this guy with 10 talents, and he thinks, wow, he took 2 talents and turned that into 10. He doesn't know where that guy started, that he only had 5 talents when he started. And so that's something that the Lord does know. He sees the whole picture. He understands all of that. So for us, it's just to withhold judgment. Oh, I think you're muted.
Oh, yeah. All right, so we're going to go over principles of happiness in family life. And in the proclamation, there's kind of, it's not exactly, is it a list like this? I can't remember, but there are like, it kind of highlights how successful marriages and families happen is maintained with like these principles. And so you should be able to identify this list. So successful marriages and families are established and maintained on principles of faith, prayer, repentance, forgiveness, respect, love, compassion, work, and wholesome recreational activities. We'll be able to identify those 9 things from a list if given. And so David A. Bednar, he gives us these 3 suggestions of what we should do within our families, how we can be more concerned, more diligent within our families. And so the first one is to express love and show it. These expressions don't need to be flowery or lengthy. We just need to show sincere and frequent expressions of love. Just simple I love yous, hugs, like anything that would go along those lines. The second suggestion is to bear testimony and live it. So be able to often bear your testimony to your spouse, to your families, let them know that your testimony grows with them and of them like every day. I kind of lost my train of thought right there. Yeah. And then the last suggestion is to be consistent. Elder Bednar highlights at the beginning that as our sons were growing up, our family did what you have done and what you now do. We had regular family prayer, scripture study, and family home evening. Now, I am sure what I'm about to describe has never occurred in your home, but it did in ours. And so he goes on and he kind of talks about how they were consistent within their homes, but he also highlights that he's pretty sure that the consistency was kind of what like his sons would remember years on after.
This one's actually really cool too. So I actually was a TA for Jeff Bednar. It's Elder Bednar's son. And I remember one class he was talking about this, and he said he was talking about this story when all the boys were fighting. Maybe you guys remember this from General Conference. All the boys were fighting and saying, you know, Mom, he's breathing my air. And Jeff Bednar was like, I was the righteous son. I was the youngest one. I was like the Nephi of the family. You know, Dad was this visionary man. And just kind of joking around about it, obviously. He was sharing the story, and then he said, he's like, honestly, I don't remember anyone ever saying, Mom, make him stop looking at me, or he's breathing my air. He said, I really don't remember any of that. And then he said, I'm sure it happened. I'm sure I said some of those things. But he said, the only thing I remember is that we had family night every week, not every night. He said he remembers that they were consistent in their efforts. And so he said he really appreciated what Elder and Sister Bednar did to raise their family. And now I've met some of Jeff's kids, and they're awesome kids. Like he's doing the same thing, raising their family, being consistent, taking these principles, and that's why he turned out to be such a great guy.
Oh, that's awesome. You saw it in action. uh, and now, kind of, I think this is Elder Holland going over this.
Yes.
Yes. And he kind of, in this talk, he highlighted that there are like other forms of abuse, but he kind of just warned against verbal abuse, like specifically, because I don't, like a lot of people don't identify it as easily as they do it like physical abuse. So with verbal abuse, he just kind of, he wanted us to think about how we talk to our spouses when we're dating, and to make sure that we are constructive but like kind and loving with our language and with our spouses. He kind of just, he was directly talking to husbands right here. He talks about how we've been they are entrusted the most sacred gift God can give you, and a daughter of God, and that he wants us to have loving and joyful companionship with each other. So just remember that the abuse that Elder Holland just highlighted was verbal abuse, especially. And then with unintentional abuse, Elder Holland goes on. He tells us to always be constructive with our comments to our children, because years after, they could definitely remember it. It could definitely just be ingrained in their minds. He is kind of wary against like comparison, because as he says in here, you may say most positively that Susan is pretty and Sandra is bright, but all Susan will remember is that she isn't bright, and Sandra that she isn't pretty. Praise each child individually for what that child is, and help him or her escape our culture's obsession with comparing, competing, and never feeling we are enough. And then you guys probably remember the different communications that we talked about. The first one I think we talked about was validating communication. And so validating communications, that communication of like, it's very appraising, it's always complimentary, and that it's just kind of like always like, I like your dress, I think you're beautiful, I think you're handsome, like very validating, very comforting. And then with personal communication, the difference with that is that you actually get into like topics of like kind of personally about you, what your opinions on certain things are, what you care about, and what makes you you, essentially. And then Elder Oaks goes over the different lines of communication, and these lines of communication are our priesthood line of revelation and our personal line of revelation. And so what he wants us to remember is that that our priesthood line essentially governs our church matters, and that our personal line is what governs how we go about our everyday lives, so in our personal lives.
Okay, so we're going to get into partnership in marriage. We talk about in class the difference between dependence and interdependence. Know the difference between these two things. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what helpmeet means a little later. But dependence and interdependence, think about, and probably Melanie's probably better at explaining this one because she's actually married. But her and her husband are interdependent, meaning that she's not, 100% dependent on her husband on everything. Like she's not depending on his testimony. She's not depending on, him to get an education because she's getting her own education, right? They're interdependent. They work together, and they're accomplishing great things, right, Melanie? Yeah. So they're interdependent. They're not, needy or anything like that. They can. I like to think, some couples sometimes one spouse will have to go on a business trip or something. They'll be gone for 3 days. Can they function without each other for 3 days? Sometimes in the movies or things like that, it'll say, I can't even function without him. That's not good. That means that they're too dependent. They're not interdependent, you know? And so you should be able to function for at least 3 days, you know, without your wife or your husband, you know, longer stretches of time, you know, months at a time, somebody who's going off in the army, things like that, that makes more sense. But, you know, for 3 days, if you're struggling, that might be a problem with dependency. All right, again, we're talking about partnership in marriage and, you know, making sure that you're taking care of your kids together. So this is a quote from President Oaks, from his talk, Good, Better, Best. He says that, you know, having lessons, team sports, school and club activities that are overscheduled can cause parents to be frazzled and frustrated. And I should have highlighted that right there. Parents could be frazzled and frustrated. Remember those two words? And then he says parents should act to preserve time for family prayers, family scripture study, family home evening, and those things that are the best things to do. You know, those extracurricular activities are good, but there's things that are better, and there's the best things that we do, which are things related to, you know, having the gospel in our homes. And I think the changes that we've made recently in the church really reflect this quote, what's best. It's a home-centered church supported gospel. And then he goes on in the same talk and he says, what do kids most want for dinner? And the answer is you. They want to talk to you. All right, so there was another conference talk from a couple years ago, I guess April 2016, so 4 years ago, from President Ballard, and he introduced the idea of family council. I don't think he introduced it, but he reiterated it and he kind of formalized it. And so he gave 4 types of family councils, and you'll need to know these 4. The first one is a general family council. So that's everybody's involved, mom, dad, and the kids. The second is an executive family council consisting of a mother and a father. So think of like the executive branch of the government, like it's just the president, just mom and dad. They're the presidents of the family, we can say. Third, a limited family council consisting of both parents and one child. And fourth, a one-on-one family council consisting of one parent and one child. So think of different opportunities or different situations where you would use different councils. For example, if a father is giving his son the talk about the birds and the bees, probably wouldn't want to use a general family council. My parents did that to me. It was really awkward. It's probably more of a one-on-one family council. My parents are awesome though. So, okay. Going on with this, there's 5 questions. This is talking about spouses, right? 5 questions that you should kind of ask yourself. If you're married, some of you out there are married, so maybe ask these questions. I'm not going to read them all, but notice what they all start with. They say, when was the last time I? When was the last time I? When was the last time I stopped myself from saying something I knew could be hurtful? When you take the test, you know, you're going to have to identify these because it's multiple choice. I looked through all the other answers. None of them start with, when was the last time I? So as long as you guys can just remember that, when was the last time I, choose that answer, and you guys will be fine on that. But read through these questions too. These are good questions, good thing to practice. That's why we have the classes, so that you can improve your eternal family. And then we'll get into this. What does help meet mean? And we said on the slide before that help me is a translation. Let me pull it up so I don't butcher this. This is talking about Adam and Eve. Eve wasn't Adam's servant or his subordinate, and the Hebrew for help and help me is ezer, a term meaning that Eve drew on heavenly powers when she supplied their marriage with the spiritual instincts uniquely available to women as a gender gift. And so she was a help meet, or a help that was, even with what Adam was supplying. They both were supplying equally important things. So know what that translation means. It basically means equal in what they were supplying. Okay. Am I doing this one?
I think so.
Okay, sorry. All right, so parenting principles. This is Momber. That's my mom. We call her Momber. Her name's Kimber, but we mixed Mom and Momber and Kimber, the Momber. So this is a quote from Julie B. Beck. she says, live in your home so that you're brilliant in the basics. And I will say that my Momber is brilliant in the basics. So that you're intentional about your roles and responsibilities in the family. Think in terms of precision, not perfection. Um, and so, she's, again, this is kind of the consistency thing. Um, the way uh, my mother raised us, she was very consistent. She didn't, bend her standards or anything in anything that she did. And now she's, kind of doing the same thing with her grandkids. That's my nephew Theo. So this is a quote from, I think, Elder Holland. I could be wrong, but he teaches us to live the gospel as conspicuously as you can. And so, be big in how you're living the gospel. Give priesthood blessings. Bear your testimony. Don't just assume that your children will somehow get the drift of your beliefs on their own. So right now, for example, with the COVID-19 going around, obviously we're doing a lot of church from home. And something that I like that my parents are doing is, here's my nephew Theo. He loves basketball, is like sickly obsessed with basketball. And so he goes out to our pool basketball hoop thing, and they turn it around for him, and he just plays basketball all day. You can tell this is Sunday because he's wearing his church clothes. This was, during church, during nursery, they went out and did basketball. And he's dressed up nice, even though they're staying home for church. My parents said, hey, let's, not every family has to do this, but we want to dress up nice. They're trying to live the gospel conspicuously. They do nursery. Is it really going to change Theo's life if he misses nursery for a month? Probably not, but my parents are trying to live the gospel as conspicuously as they can. All right, now we're getting into discipline, parental discipline. As far as parental discipline goes, certainly the overarching and undergirding principle is that discipline of children must be motivated more by love than by punishment. So why do we punish our kids? It's because we love them. We want them to do better. We want them to be better. And the two factors to remember, Melanie, you might have to help me out with this, but the two factors that we need to remember are both she's looking it up.
I'm looking at it. I just had it up. We need to remember the two factors that when we're taking into how to discipline them, it's the level of affection and their level of expectation.
That is really the answer. Their level of affection and their level of expectations, okay? So just circle that when you get to it. Thanks. Okay, chastising children. Brigham Young counseled, if you are ever called upon to chasten a person, never chasten beyond the balm you have within you to bind up. So you're not going to, freak out at a kid. This is my other nephews, Gray and Oliver. They're eating Taco Bell. You can kind of see that Gray has tons of taco grease all over him. He probably ruined that shirt. And, what's the point of, freaking out, screaming at Gray for doing that? He's just a, little kid. And so, I don't know, that's why I included that one. Never chase him beyond the balm you have within you to bind up. And so this is, just a small thing that happened, just a little, hey, Gray, be a little bit more careful about how you're eating, or else you're going to ruin all your shirts. But we still love them to death, and they still make us super happy. There's two questions on this one, actually. So it talks about what Brigham Young said or counseled, and then it's also going to ask what D&C 121 says about this. And if you remember, it says, reproving betimes with sharpness, and then showing an increased measure of love. I know I said that wrong, but sorry. So just remember what Doctrine and Covenants 121 teaches. It's a similar type of counsel. Teaching the gospel. If you guys look in Doctrine and Covenants section 68, it tells us the importance of teaching the gospel in our families. There's going to be a question asking, like, what happens, who kind of takes the blame in a situation where a parent fails to teach their kids the gospel and that kid strays off and becomes a murderer or something like that? Well, the fault falls on the head of the parents, and obviously the child too, because they're a murderer. They should probably know better. But in those situations, the parents kind of take a bit of the blame. But if a parent does everything that they can to teach the gospel and the child still goes astray, then all the blame falls on the child. Let's see. And then this is David A. Bednar. He says, for example, a naturally occurring family conversation at dinner may be the perfect setting for a parent to recount and testify of specific blessings he or she received during the course of relatively routine activities for the day. And then he says such occasions don't need to be scheduled or scripted. He talks about being spontaneous. So look for that word spontaneous. Okay, I put this picture in. It looks like I'm like teaching them the gospel, but I'm really not. We're watching Space Jam on my phone. Has nothing to do with the gospel. Well, okay, yeah, whatever. Okay. And the last one, parental hypocrisy. This is from President Faust. He says that if parents are hypocrites or they're acting one way and then teaching their children a different way, it can lead children to be cynical and unbelieving. And when I hear those two adjectives, cynical and unbelieving, like, can you imagine a child being cynical and unbelieving? Those just aren't terms that go with children. We don't want them to be like that. And so if children are expected to be honest, parents must be honest. If children are expected to be virtuous, parents must be virtuous. And so, don't be a hypocrite.
All right, now we're going to get into providing for temporal needs. So Gordon B. Hinckley really wanted us to remember that, like, the root of like more trouble in marriage that he's ever seen from all the other causes combined was that it was money. So yeah, he's pretty sure that money is the root of more trouble in marriage than all other causes combined. So just remember that and keep that in mind.
And this one, sometimes the scripture says the love of money, but President Hinckley was specific to say that money itself, because maybe a couple isn't greedy about money, but maybe they just aren't taking finances into account at all. They're ignoring their financial portfolios, things like that. And that is what's causing issues in their marriage, is because they're not paying attention to that stuff. So it's not just being greedy, it's just money. The whole idea of money is causing problems for them.
Oh yeah, definitely. All right, so keep in mind that this is the kind of just like what is a provident provider, what is provident living in general. And Robert D. Hales said that it is joyfully living within our means, being content with what we have, avoiding excessive debt, and diligently saving and preparing for rainy day emergencies. So we're not constantly spending our money on things that we don't need, like you don't need the fanciest car or like the biggest mansion, but we're living within what we need, and we're putting away money for in case of emergencies. And then these are the principles of provident living. Like, I think after this slide, we're going to talk about like the 5 principles of economic constancy, but right now these are the principles of provident living. So there's 4 of these. And it's first, husbands and wives should counsel together and use family councils to make financial decisions. So our family councils are coming into play right here. Number 2, the foundation of provident living is the law of the tithe. 3, be an example with the payment of fast offerings. And 4, establish a family budget and involve the children. So we've gone over the definition of a provident provider, what is provident living, and the principles of provident living. So these are the principles of economic constancy. And the first one is to pay an honest tithe. The Lord is the source of all of our blessings, including life itself. The payment of tithing is a commandment with a promise. If we obey this commandment, we are promised that we will prosper in the land. This prosperity consists of more than material goods. It may include enjoying good health and vigor of mind. It includes family solidarity, so I can never say that word, and spiritual increase. The second of the 5 is to live on less than you earn. Elder Hales found that there's no way that you can ever earn more than you can spend. If anyone knows, let me know. I am convinced that it is not the amount of money an individual earns that brings peace of mind as much as it is having control of his money. Money can be an obedient servant, but a harsh taskmaster. Those who structure their standard of living to allow a little surplus control their circumstances. Those who spend a little more than they earn are controlled by their circumstances. They are in bondage. So basically, the money in our lives can trap us essentially if we don't live within what we like get, what we earn. It could definitely put us into debt and just kind of control us later on. Um, so the third one is to learn to distinguish between needs and wants. So there's a lot of needs that we have, such as like homes and food and transportation, but it's not always. And then our wants are kind of always like the nicest things, the luxuries of life. But make sure that we know the difference so that we're not spending on things that we don't need, especially within our families. We need certain things, but we want certain things, but we need to always make sure we have room for the needs. I love this picture. The fourth one is to develop and live within a budget. Um, so provision should be made first for basic operating needs such as our food, our clothing, second for home equity, third emergencies, health insurance, etc. Fourth, wise investments, and yeah, just make sure we have our budget and we learn that we need to live within it. And then here's our last one. It's to be honest in all our financial affairs. The ideal of integrity will never go out of style. It applies to all that we do. As leaders and members of the church, we should be the epitome of integrity. And then Ezra Taft Benson kind of goes on and he goes, the world would take people out of the slums. Christ takes the slums out of the people, and then they take themselves out of the slums.
This is like my all-time favorite quote from this class.
Right? Yeah. And then we have D&C 2935. We recommend that you guys look that up. This is kind of talking about the difference between spiritual and temporal commandments. So make sure you know the differences between those two. So go ahead and look up that scripture and know how to define those two.
Okay, this is the last section that we're going to talk about, promoting and defending the family. So Sister Oscarson says, the proclamation on the family has become our benchmark for judging the philosophies of the world. And so basically, you know, here's the standards of the world and here's the standards of the church. You know, before they were kind of the same, but the standards of the world have just been declining and declining and declining. They're the ones that are moving. The standards of the church have been staying the same. For, you know, as far like the standards of the proclamation is more than 20 years old. And so those standards are constant. And so that's what we should be using for the benchmark instead of the standards of the world, because those are moving around. So, you know, logically, it just makes sense. And then Sister Osterson also says there are 3 principles taught in the proclamation, which I think are especially in need of steadfast defenders. So steadfast defenders, you know, you can maybe Google this because you should probably look up what they are. Because they're going to be on the test. We're not going to tell you right now. That's the one thing that you have to look up. And then we're going to move into church and politics. So we're talking about being steadfast defenders of the proclamation, being the type of person that doesn't just kind of idly live by, you know, not proclaiming. I mean, you don't have to go out and shout it from the rooftops, but, you know, be an example of what the proclamation is trying to teach. Sorry, let me go back to Sister Oscarson. Speaking of being an example, she says that the proclamation might not be your situation. We talked about, you know, that circle. Are you inside the circle or outside the circle? She says you might be outside the circle, but you should do everything that you can to strive to live the principles of the proclamation, because the proclamation isn't just for people in the circle. The proclamation is for everyone, even people who, you know, might have different lifestyles, or maybe a single mother thinks that she doesn't need to live the proclamation doesn't apply to her, but it does. We should all try to live the principles taught in the proclamation, no matter our situation, because there's one plan of happiness, and that's what the Lord has prepared for us. Okay, now getting to the church and politics. So I just made a list of what the church does and what the church does not do when it comes to politics. And so this is the list of what the church does not do. The church does not endorse, promote, or oppose political parties. And so when Mitt Romney, for example, was running for president so many years ago, he was, I don't know if he was asked, but from church policy, we know that the church was not endorsing him, even though he was a member of the church. And even today, him running for senator, the church didn't endorse him. And this one's important. So in Idaho, I'm from Idaho, and I love state politics. Last time we had a governor debate, my state president decided that he was running for governor. Imagine if the church would have started endorsing him, because just a couple months later, another guy in the state decided he was running for governor. And so the church goes so far as to even just like, they released him from his calling as state president, not as a punishment, but just because he wanted to run for governor. And they knew that, maybe this wasn't a good calling hit for him to have state president if he was going to be running for governor, while somebody in, I think it was the state right next to us, was also running for governor. And so that's why they don't promote or endorse any candidate, because the church really isn't into politics, but we are into certain things. We'll talk about that later. You also notice that we don't use church buildings as places to vote. That would be great in some places, but we don't do it because of these. We don't want them to be resources for political purposes. They also don't attempt to direct members as to which candidate or party they should give their votes to. This policy applies to whether or not the candidate for office is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or not. And they also don't attempt to direct or dictate to a government leader. All right, so now we'll talk about what they do, because maybe it'll clarify a few things. The church does encourage its members to play a role as responsible citizens. So we always get those letters from the First Presidency saying, we encourage you to go out and vote. They do expect the members to engage in the political process and to be informed. So that's just being a responsible citizen. Because if we're informed, we don't get our information from the church, we get our information from, the candidates themselves, and hopefully not from fake news. They also request that candidates do not imply that their candidacy or platforms are endorsed by the church. So this doesn't always happen. And I guess for an example, Mitt Romney kind of, during the impeachment, he kind of implied a little bit that the church was endorsing him when he talked about, how the church has a hymn called "Do What Is Right, Let the Consequence Follow." I like Mitt Romney, but I think maybe he should have kept that out and not kind of imply that. I don't know if he crossed the line or not. I won't get into that, but that's just kind of to give you guys an example. The church also reserves the right as an institution to address in a nonpartisan way issues that it believes have significant community or moral consequences. So an example of this, I think, is the legalization of marijuana, medical marijuana, in the state of Utah about a year or two ago. They were talking about the legalization of medical marijuana. The church came out with a statement saying that they were against that. But they did it in a nonpartisan way. They didn't say, we're with the Republicans on this, and they didn't say, we're with the Democrats on this. What they were against was the church went in and they kind of had their own view, because the Republicans didn't want medical marijuana at all. The Democrats did. I'm just using general terms here. But the church came in and say, medical marijuana could be a potentially helpful thing. But the way this bill is written does not offer enough protection to people. We're worried about the innocent. And so you can see that the church came in with their kind of, the church came in a nonpartisan way. They weren't taking sides. They were just putting out, their views on it, saying that this is kind of going against what we need to have to protect the innocent. This could cause some consequences. This bill was not very well written. That happens a lot in government. Bills get written poorly, and sometimes the church steps out and says, hey, this bill isn't written as pristine as we would like it to be, and it's going to affect the innocent. All right, so Dallin H. Oaks, going into politics a little bit more, he talks about truth and tolerance, and he compares it to a two-sided coin. So if you cannot possess or use the coin of tolerance without being conscious of both sides. And so if basically he's saying, if you're demanding tolerance for your race or your gender or things like that, you have to give tolerance too. And I think this is a really, really insightful thing that is so easy to forget when we're getting into politics. You have to give, and if you're going to demand tolerance, you have to give tolerance, which is huge. It's easy to demand tolerance, but it's kind of hard to give tolerance, which a lot of people forget sometimes. All right, and then lastly, this is President Oaks again. He just says, be selective and wise about the things that you bring into the public square. And so there's important things, he's all about good, better, best. There's good things that you can bring into the public square, but there's better things and the best things that you want to bring into the public square. And that's just good information. He knows politics pretty well. He was a Supreme Court justice, okay, I think that's it. All right. The rest of this is a comprehensive portion. These slides are posted on Learning Suite. It goes over things like core eternal doctrines, esoteric teachings, things like that. Reliable sources of doctrine. This is a really good thing to go over. Look at that. Measuring doctrine, knowing those things. Just look through these slides that Melanie and I put together. Look at that picture of Melanie and her husband. They look good. We talk about the plan of salvation. We talk about, oh, look at that picture of my nephews. They look good too. We talk about the requirements for faith in the plan of salvation. What kind of being is God? What is the difference between God the Father and the Son? And how do we know what we do about God? It's because of Jesus Christ. We talked about the creation. We talked about the fall of Adam and Eve. We talked about the atonement of Jesus Christ. We talked about the fundamental principles of our religion. People miss this question all the time. So just know this quote really well. That the fundamental principles of our religion is the testimony of the apostles and prophets concerning Jesus Christ. Talked about what the atonement is. Remember these 4 things that we talked about. Usually remember the 3 things, but we forget about the ministry and the spirit world. Read that quote. We'll let you read these. There's going to be 2 questions on the universal gifts of the atonement from Elder Holland. Then we also talk about spiritual and physical death. Let you guys read through that. Practical effects of the atonement. And then this is kind of the last thing that you need to know is the church policy and same-sex attraction. So make sure you are familiar with those. If you have any questions about any of these things, feel free to reach out to me and Melanie or to Brother Griffiths. You can email us, text us. We can set up Zoom meetings if you need them. Or Melanie has FaceTime, right?
Oh, I have FaceTime.
Yes, FaceTime for all you Apple users. I have Google Duo for all of you Android users.
I also have Google Duo too, so.
Well, everyone just go to Melanie. She's good at this stuff. She knows what she's doing. She's actually married. But anyways, we're rooting for you. We know you guys are going to do great. It's been a great semester with you guys. Melanie has been an awesome person to work with. She knows her stuff. She's a great TA. I'm glad that I got to work with her this semester. You have anything else you want to add, Melanie?
I've loved working with Hunter. He's helped me so much. He's been doing this for so long, so I had a lot of questions. But you guys are going to do amazing. I've loved working with you guys this semester. If you have any other questions or if I missed an email or anything, feel free to email me again or just reach out to me. I'm always here for you. You guys are going to do great.
All right. See you guys later.